Robust forum on housing. I will tell you, I had the opportunity to read a portion of the book, The Color of Law. How many of you have read or know of The Color of Law? That is an incredible book. It's by a guy named Richard Rothstein, and it documents the incredible, revealing history of how the laws and policies passed by local, state, and federal governments actually promoted the discriminatory patterns that continue to this day. So if you haven't read that book, The Color of Law, you need to get it if you are at all associated with the field of housing. Now, today promises to be both informative and thought-provoking because it is going to involve local, national, and thought leaders and experts. And as we think about this whole notion of poverty in Memphis, we can't just do one thing at a time. We've got to address and attack all aspects of it. And housing and transportation, job opportunities, early childhood education, all of those things have to be dealt with at the same time if we are going to tremendously impact poverty, which, by the way, has increased and not declined if you look at the poverty report. So we've got some work to do in Memphis, Tennessee, and you're part of the willing workers that are going to be working on much of what is happening in the marketplace. It is my hope that the constructive dialogue today can pave the way to develop some additional partnerships in the marketplace and address some of the problems that can help to remedy some of the decisions made by local, state, and federal government that promoted and perpetuated practices that unfortunately many linger on even now. Because although we know that there have been redlining opportunities, I'm not sure that that is totally over in many of our communities, and there are things that we can do to address those. So in addition to the old challenges, one of the new challenges we have on the housing front in Memphis is that we're the fastest growing rental market in the country. The fastest growing rental market, and that has been created because a lot of students who go to college have college debt. They can't afford to buy a house, so they are renting properties when we have been one of the strongest markets for home ownership in America. So we add that challenge to the mix as well. You got some awesome work to do, Paul. But you can do it. You're the one for it. This will be a tremendously awesome day today. I wish I could stay and listen to all of the presenters, but unfortunately I am not going to be able to do that, so I'll stay at least and hear what the wonderful Paul has to say. But it certainly is my privilege to be here this morning and to engage with HCD in this tremendous work. So thank you, Paul, for inviting me, and I look forward to working with you hand in hand. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I am Maury Albertson, the Deputy Director of the City of Memphis Division of Housing and Community Development. Welcome to the inaugural State of Memphis Housing Summit. We thank you so much for coming today, and we look forward to your participation. First, I'd like to thank the partners who joined us in putting this event together. Without them, we couldn't have made this happen. These include the Kresge Foundation, Pike Family Foundation, the Plow Foundation, Neighborhood Preservation, Inc., Building Memphis, and the Tennessee Housing Development Agency. I'd also like to thank all of our staff and volunteers who worked really hard to put this together. And again, without your support and help, we couldn't have made this happen. I'd also like to acknowledge our elected officials that are with us this morning. I see Councilwoman Cheyenne Johnson and Councilwoman Jerry Curry. If there are others with us, would you please stand so that we can express our appreciation. We do expect the Honorable Mayor Jim Strickland to be joining us very shortly. So our theme today, From Momentum to Opportunity, will lead us to think about how we build on the momentum that we currently have in Memphis and create opportunities to build synergy around housing strategies. The sessions today reflect the city and our partners' commitment to identifying strategies for equitable growth and development. through topics such as the impacts of absentee owners in our neighborhoods, the outcomes associated with affordable housing gaps, the relationship between housing and health, the importance of knowing our neighbors, and other topics. We will be provided with a lot of data and context for how to address specific housing challenges in the Memphis region. So we look forward to hearing from all of our speakers and all the dialogue with all of you who are participating today. And we hope to end the day with an increased understanding of the state of housing in Memphis and where we go from here. So now we'll hear remarks from the Kresge Foundation. I'd first like to welcome Chantal Rush from Kresge Foundation to give some brief remarks.
When I first came to Memphis in 2015, the first thing I learned was you never want to follow Beverly Robinson. So I just apologize in advance. So just a huge thank you to Memphis HCE for actually having the Kresge Foundation here today, and also for giving us the opportunity to sponsor this event. We think it's just tremendously important. Our mission is to expand opportunity for people with low incomes in America's cities, and we really focus on community and economic development. And for those of you in the room, who are all of you, who know something deeply about community development, you know that housing is like one of the core, utmost areas that are important in community development. We view housing not just as a simple structure, but number one, a place where parents can actually have the security to go enter the workforce to do their work, where kids can spend their time at night getting them away to go to school the next morning. Housing contributes also to economic stability. We know it's the cost of housing that ensures that people have money left over after they pay their rent or they don't. Or even more excitingly, housing can mean that someone is actually able to be contributing to the equity of the home that they're going to own down the road. Housing determines our health. We have a health program at Kresge, and we always, at the end of the day, sometimes we kind of joke and we're like, isn't housing just the ultimate social determinant of health? And isn't it the thing we should be maybe doing more of? Housing also determines how our neighborhoods look and feel. So we're excited to think about this challenge here in Memphis with you. And I have to say, as we've worked in Memphis, we've been more deeply committed to Memphis since 2013. We've made about $25 million of investments. Over that time, what we've seen is that there's really been a strengthening of the number of people and the institutions and organizations working in the housing space. And it makes us think that now more than ever, there's a tremendous opportunity to really seize the moment and create more safe, affordable, and healthy housing in Memphis. There have been a tremendous strengthening from the outsider's vantage point of backbone organizations. You've got things like NPI, United Housing, more and more developers doing work in neighborhoods. A lot of CDCs and collaboratives that we've had the benefit of working with who strategize every day about how to attract more equitable and affordable housing in their neighborhoods, and who are really doing the hard work to put together these deals. There's a huge affirmation on the part of the city to this work, and a firm commitment to asset-based neighborhood revitalization through Memphis 3.0. And also just a swath of development happening everywhere that makes more affordable housing production even more and more possible. So we're really committed to supporting that work, continue to support that work, and other efforts that are elevated today. I think when we think about it, there's still so many important questions to answer with housing in Memphis, and I think Beverly alluded to a lot of these. How can housing and community development really drive a more equitable economic development in Memphis? Economic development in Memphis won't be successful unless existing residents today are a part of the wins. How can housing strategies create community wealth? How can housing be paired with thriving commercial corridors and job hubs so that they have the greatest impact on neighborhoods? So we really view today as a tremendous opportunity to sit alongside you, to learn with you. Thank you for having us. And we really look forward to continuing to work together. And we hope that we can be a resource and provide any support that we can from our little wheelhouse in this work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angel, for everybody, all of the sponsors that have worked with us on this event. So next I'd like to introduce the man who needs no introduction, our Honorable Mayor, Jim Strickland. Please come forward.
Morning.
Morning.
good to remind ourselves that Memphis is a city that has changed the world. We're the birthplace of rock and roll, home of the blues. We've greatly advanced the civil rights movement. 1,300 brave men went out on strike against my predecessor 51 years ago with a simple placard that still resonates today that said, "I am a man." We Memphians have perfected express package delivery to the point where the name of the company is synonymous with the action. Everyone in here has FedExed a package. And when the name of your company becomes a verb, you're pretty good at what you do. And every single day, for almost 60 years, we treated and cured childhood cancer at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So Memphis is a city that has changed the world. But I know by the look on everyone's face here today, we are not done changing the world. It is true that Memphis has momentum. 24,000 more people working now than 3.5 years ago, $19 billion of recently completed, ongoing, or about to be in development in our area, most of which is in the city limits. But we're not done changing the world. As we enter this new century of soul, our third century, we're committed to our city being a city for everyone, no matter how much you make. And I think we've got a roadmap for that. For the first time since 1981, and maybe for the first time ever, with our plan Memphis 3.0, which is a roadmap for growth for every single neighborhood in the city. I was speaking with a group in Hickory Hill a couple of months ago, and I said, you know, this is the first time we've had a plan for your neighborhood since 1981, and it hit me. Hickory Hill wasn't part of Memphis in 1981. So this is the first plan for Hickory Hill ever. I know many cities across the country have these things that Memphis 3.0 is birthed, but I'm proud that we're doing it now. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is the city getting into the game to help people retain their houses. The Community Catalyst Fund, which is allowing us to invest in a targeted way, in partnership with the neighbors, our capital improvement budget to improve a neighborhood. Our first project was Tillman Cove. We put some money in that, demolished it, and that's going to be an incredible, see Noah sitting there. That's our first of many that we're going to do. We've also incentivized for our health and ed board over 5,000, the construction or renovation of over 5,000 quality, affordable housing units just in the last 3 years in this city. So we are dedicated to this, and I see such great partners in this room that I'm optimistic that we can accelerate our momentum in every neighborhood in our city, in hand with every neighbor in our city. So thanks for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I want to thank all of you again for being here. I'm really excited to see the room. I feel like I'm in a room with a lot of friends because all of us that are here today are committed to this work. Most of you I've met before. Those of you that I hadn't, you're now one of our partners and one of our friends, because in order to get where we want to go as a community, we're going to need everybody in this room plus some. We're going to need to have a concerted effort to ensure that we're investing the dollars, the limited resources that we have, in ways that is going to benefit the people of this community. Safe and quality housing is a basic need, and all the residents in this community need it. They deserve it, but far too often, this is simply not the case. Cost burden, homelessness, housing instability, housing crowding, high eviction rates, that's the reality for many of the residents that live in our community. As we look at the broader revitalization of neighborhoods, you begin to see the connection that housing has with other issues, as been reiterated by other speakers before me today. Issues such as economic mobility, education, health, transportation, public safety, and almost any matter that involves the betterment of a neighborhood or of people and families, housing is at the core. If you don't have stable housing, it's going to be difficult for anybody to achieve the outcomes that they want and those that they deserve. So today's summit is about us becoming more informed, about being very specific about the issues that affect the Memphis community. Oftentimes we talk about issues in the context of the national conversation, which is good. We should know what's happening elsewhere, but the impacts on our city are sometimes a little bit different. And so we want to make sure that we have the appropriate data and context as we have these conversations. We want to gain a shared understanding of what the challenges are that we face and what are the potential solutions. So last year during the MLK 50, John Hope Bryant came to Memphis and he said something that really stuck with me. He said that history doesn't feel historic when you're living in it. It just feels like another day. And I really believe that applies to what's happening in the city of Memphis right now. The city is being reshaped as we speak, and I believe that we are at a pivotal point in our trajectory as a city. We're seeing increased interest in downtown and midtown like we hadn't seen in 40 years. It feels like every week there's a new investor or developer that's calling our office or reaching out to the mayor's office to discuss development opportunities. This interest to invest in the city of Memphis actually creates an opportunity for us to drive development in the communities that hadn't seen the same level of interest as we have in downtown and midtown. Through Memphis 3.0, which you'll hear about shortly from the next speakers, the city worked with residents across the city to develop a comprehensive plan that identifies anchor districts in neighborhoods across the city. As the mayor alluded to, all neighborhoods now have a plan for how growth should happen that's been informed by the community. So as we seek to drive investments, we want to use Memphis 3.0 as the framework. And so even with these opportunities, there are some very real housing challenges that we must be cognizant of as we embark on this work. There are 6 challenges that, as I sat down and just brainstormed, what are the issues that I see every day in the work that we do with many of you as we try to get some of these very difficult projects done. I identified 6 of them. One, it would be the low cost of housing in our community. And so that's for ownership or rental. It makes it very difficult for projects to pencil out. In some of our submarkets in the city, the average home value can be less than $50,000. The banks have limited products to fund home buyer loans below this amount. I know our friend Roshan has created some products that can do that, but it's still not happening on a wide scale. And so even if it's a rental unit, when the units need considerable work, it makes them very difficult to cash flow when the average rents in the area are so low. Which leads to number 2, low wages, which reduces the income that's available to support higher rents. Affordability is always relative, so affordability just means what can you afford? And so in order to truly stabilize families and housing, we must identify ways to raise people up out of poverty. I just talked about the fact that our housing values are very low, so if they go up, we also need families' income to go up as well. So when you're looking to provide quality housing for extremely low-income families, so HUD defines that as 0 to 30% of the area median income. So for a family of 4, that's roughly $24,000. For a single person, it's $12,000, just to give you context. It's very difficult to make any rent work when you're making that level of income, and so a Section 8 voucher is almost a must. And so the last time I talked to my friend Marsha Lewis over at the Housing Authority, there were roughly 8,000 vouchers that were in use and another 8,000 people on the waiting list. So that tells you the demand that we have in that sector. Now, when we looked at the affordable rental supply gap from 2016, we had 38,000 households that met the definition of extremely low income. But we only had 13,000 units that were available for them at that price point. So what happens to the other families that are missing those units? That's what leads to overcrowding in housing and some of the issues that you see there. So we absolutely must include workforce development and economic mobility as a part of the conversation if we want to sustain any gains that we make on developing a housing unit. Because otherwise, in 20 years, we'll be right back in the same place having the same conversation. So number 3 is a high predominance of single-family homes that are being used as rental units. Over the past year or so, Fraser has led the city when it comes to the number of sales transactions in the city. I was at a meeting yesterday with Steve Lockwood, and he shared with me that 85% of those sales are from one investor to another, which means that homeowners and the nonprofit developers in our community are competing with investor capital, mostly from out of state. So our single-family homes are becoming long-term rental units, which changes the character of neighborhoods that were developed for home ownership. So that's a challenge that we have to address. Number 4 challenge would be poor quality aging housing stock. Given some of the points noted above, there's a large amount of housing that's in a severe state of disrepair. Homeowners and landlords are either unable to make the investment or to repair the property or unwilling to do so. The end result is that occupants in the units are impacted with poor indoor air quality, leading to asthma, lead poisoning from paint chips, and other health-related issues. And given these quality issues in the units, the families become more transient, which has impacts on educational outcomes, job opportunities, and transportation. So number 5, I know it sounds bad, but we're gonna pick it up in a minute. And number 5, we have a large geography as a city. The city of Memphis is currently 325 square miles, and the city's working to address some of that by doing some de-annexation of roughly 15 to 20 miles. But we're still very large with roughly 650,000 people. So 325 square miles, 650,000 people. Boston is 91 square miles with 670,000 people. Just to give you a little bit of context. So imagine the strain that puts on transportation trying to get people to and from their house to their job. It's very difficult to build spillover from development. So one of the things that you like to see in this industry is once you develop something, you hope that it spills over to the next adjacent area, but it's difficult to do when you have a community that's so large. So the last one that I noted is that there's a lack of quality middle-income housing alternatives in the core city neighborhoods. As much as we focus on remember I said affordability is relative. We also need to have some vibrant middle-income housing alternatives inside of our city. Sometimes when people buy a house in some of the areas outside of the city, it's not because they don't want to be in the city, it's because they can't find that product in a neighborhood that they would like to be in. And in order to truly revitalize a neighborhood, we need to have a strong economic base to support the commercial services that neighborhoods want and demand. Our neighborhoods should be able to provide diverse housing types and options for families in all income brackets, and enhance resident opportunities and access to jobs and services in close proximity to our homes. So if we want that for our community, those are the issues that we have to address. But despite these challenges, there are several examples of projects that have moved forward and are carving a path to show us how we can get this done. The mayor mentioned one of them, which is Tillman Cove, where the city identified a site when they did the plan for the Binghamton community. This was identified as the #1 target for redevelopment, the #1 place that the residents said they wanted to see change. The city actually acquired the property from a landowner that wanted a ridiculous price, so nobody else would buy it, but he did sell it to the city. And so the city went out and we were very strategic about how we put out a bid for developers. We got 4 responses from development teams, and in that RFQ that we issued, we included the things that the community said they wanted. And the selected developer is going to bring that type of affordable housing to the community. So we were very strategic about how we wanted to move forward on that. Another project in Fraser, Renaissance at Steel, with the Work CDC, Comcap partners, and other partners that they're working with to redevelop a blighted apartment complex, roughly $17 million. And this is a very, very difficult project. I know because I saw all the emails. We had to do the closing. And it was very frustrating going through it for the development team, but they made it happen. It takes commitment. They're working with the Fraser education leaders to ensure that this project not only provides housing, but also provides educational opportunities for the students in the area. In the medical district, anchored institutions have stepped up to acquire land to create more housing opportunities for employees. The Medical District Collaborative is working with national partners to develop creative financing alternatives for this work. Foot Park in South City, which we just had a grand opening for the first phase last month. This project is focused not only on the housing aspect, but there's a strong casework aspect that's being led by Urban Strategies. This has led to an increase in employment for the residents from Foot Homes, and it's something that I think this city should be proud of, because we're focused on not just the housing units, but actually the people that will occupy the units, because that's what it's about at the end of the day. And there are many of our colleagues that make up this room, CDCs, that are building single-family homes every day in Fraser, Raleigh, North Memphis, South Memphis, Orange Mound, and the Heights, and the list goes on. So all of these efforts are complex. They require significant time, commitment, and resources, but we have people that are out here getting it done. And I think that we should all give ourselves a round of applause for what we're able to do despite the challenges. The key for us is going to be to codify these efforts so we can learn from and replicate them in other areas. And I strongly believe that quality housing alternatives for the residents in this region will continue to increase. Today, we're planting the seeds for a concerted effort to provide insight with regards to where we stand as a city, the direction where we plan to go, and the strategies on how we get there. So I want to thank you all for listening to me on that part, and now I'm going to bring up our speakers for the next session. I want to acknowledge our assessor who walked in, Mr. Melvin Burgess. We acknowledge the representative there. He's doing very well from the trail to try to make these types of initiatives happen in Orange Mound, and so we're all committed to moving in the same direction. So I'm going to transition and ask our two panelists to come forward. We're going to talk about data for a changing Memphis. So we talked about numbers and figures. They're going to give us a little more context. So I want to invite Ashley Cash, the administrator of the Office of Planning and Development, to come up to the stage, as well as Allison Nimero from Strategic Economics. And I'm going to turn it over to them.
Couple technical difficulties. Good morning. Are you good? I'm looking at your So good morning. I'm Ashley Cash. I just want to clarify. So I'm the administrator of the Office of Comprehensive Planning in the Division of Planning and Development. I'm very excited to be here this morning. It's been my great pleasure to work with many folks who were in the audience, many community members, many other stakeholders, to develop the comprehensive plan, the Memphis 3.0 plan, really over the last 2.5 years. And then Allison, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, and I have a working microphone, yay. I'm Allison Nemero from Strategic Economics. We're an urban economics consulting firm, and we were privileged to work with the city of Memphis on the comp plan. Specifically, we did some analysis and work around understanding neighborhood change in the city, understanding the existing economic and workforce development challenges, and helping the city develop the equitable opportunities element of the comp plan.
Thank you. So we just got a couple of slides to frame the conversation. I think Director Young did a really great job of thinking about all of the major issues and opportunities that the city has to improve affordable housing. And I think I'll just point over here, we can go to our first slide. So you hear a lot about the Memphis 3.0 plan. For several of you, this will be a rehashing of the same information, but there will be a test at the end of the year, so pay attention. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we've got Allison here from Strategic Economics. The plan was developed with our office as the lead, but we work with many other partners shown here, several local groups, and then some national consultants as well. Next slide. And so what do we talk about when we say a comprehensive plan? Mayor Strickland already mentioned that many other cities, a lot of times
target for redevelopment. The number one place that the residents said they wanted to see change. The city actually acquired the property from a landowner that wanted a ridiculous price, so nobody else would buy it, but he did sell it to the city. And so the city went out and we
Expecting. The comprehensive plan gives people a way to know where activity should happen, and that activity should be driven by where the community wants to see change, where the city is trying to improve conditions, etc. So it's a policy document. It guides land use decisions. It guides investment decisions on how the city invests over time. But it's not really a development plan. It's not a development proposal. It's a way, it's a framework to get started. We had a lot of community participation with the plan, so when I talk a little bit later about some of the policy recommendations as it relates to affordable housing, when we talk about the targeted strategy that Director Young and the mayor has mentioned, the anchor strategy really focusing on certain neighborhoods, or not even certain neighborhoods, really focusing on nodes within neighborhoods across the city. That was informed by a vast amount of community participation and then other stakeholder information. And so what's the framing mantra that we use? It's build up, not out. We have a huge city, and what we heard overwhelmingly from residents is that we want the city, we all want the city to focus on neighborhoods, focus on core places where we can change it. So the vision statement is really to say build up, not out. We'll be a city that anchors growth on the core, so we've got a vibrant core, but we also want to anchor growth in neighborhoods of the city. We want to be a city of greater connectivity and a city of opportunity for all. And so how can we create that through a set of guiding actions and policy recommendations? So here, I'll turn it over to Allison. That's the framing of how we got here. This was largely a qualitative process, but we also included the quantitative analysis to support and figure out how to move forward. So Allison, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you all know, as has been alluded to earlier, the city of Memphis has really grown substantially over time in area, but a little bit less so in population. So this shows in the blue line population growth over time, and the red bars are the city's total area as it is annexed over time. And so what you can see is that the city has been growing in size, very steadily in terms of geographic area, but that population growth has really leveled off since about the late 70s or the 1980s. And this has been supported in large part by city and county policy over time. The idea of annexing new land and building the infrastructure to support new neighborhoods. And this was really in order to support, in many ways, the city's fiscal and economic health, but it also had some unintended consequences. So we looked at neighborhood change since 2000 and used a variety of metrics. This map shows household growth and decline over time. The red census tracts are places that have seen increases in the number of households since 2000, and the blue tracts have seen declines in the number of households living there since 2000. And so the important thing to understand overall is that the number of households in Memphis didn't really increase during this time. It stayed stable or maybe even declined a little bit. And change within the city was driven by people, residents, existing residents moving from one neighborhood to another primarily. And so what we've seen is out-migration from many of the older neighborhoods in the north and the south, in north and south Memphis, out to more eastern neighborhoods and along the Poplar Avenue corridor. And this is really driven by people making decisions for their own families, where they think they can find better housing, better access to schools, better access to jobs. But what happens, of course, is that leaves some of the older neighborhoods struggling with vacancies and abandoned properties and physical deterioration. This map, shows the household income change since 2000, and blue tracts are places where incomes declined since 2000, and yellow tracts are places that were stable or where there was a small increase in incomes. Overall, as I'm sure you know, household incomes haven't really gone up since this time period, in large part, I think, because of the recession and the challenges in recovering from that. So again, you can see that overall the city hasn't seen a big increase in incomes at all. And even some of the places in Raleigh and Cordova and Southeast where there was an increase in the number of households living there, there was still a decline in the median household incomes, suggesting that a lot of what has been happening is lower and moderate income households moving out to new locations where they may have better opportunities. And finally, this shows change in median home values from 2010 actually to 2015, so coming out of the recession. And as has been discussed earlier, even as incomes have been pretty stagnant, housing values have continued to go up. Rents have gone up even more. And so this creates the challenge of people folks whose incomes haven't really increased, trying to pay more and more for housing. I believe that as of 2015, approximately a quarter of the average Memphian households' incomes went to pay for housing and another quarter for transportation. And in some neighborhoods, 5% of households' spending was on energy costs because of the challenges with living in an older and disinvested housing stock. So the final thing we looked at was planned infrastructure investments. We mapped a variety of different city plans at the time and found that, as you might expect, really, the city was investing in the same places that we're seeing an increase in household change. So again, continuing to support the sort of outward movement of Memphis households. And if this trend continues, of course, what we'll see over time is a continued outward migration, supported both by people's preferences and response to where they can find a good quality housing stock and good access to opportunity, but also if city policies were not to change by the city and other agencies' actions in terms of where they're going to support growth. And so that's where the comp plan comes in terms of changing the status quo.
And so what do you make of that information? So we saw where we have, and I think a lot of us have seen, maybe not these specific indicators on maps, but seen different types of indicators on maps, and it usually shows the same pattern. Where there is opportunity, there's opportunity. Where there are negative outcomes, it's like that for all outcomes. And so what do you make of all of that information? When we talk about wanting to stabilize housing for individuals, wanting to encourage and increase housing opportunities and all the opportunities that come along with it. How can we do that with such a broad city? And really that's where the approach of an anchor community was developed. And so we said, we know we can't look at huge swaths of area. We know that certain types of land uses are unlikely to change, but where there is a collection of different types of uses, how can the city invest and put their resources forward first in order to encourage the private market to come along and do the same? And so using that information, this map, what you see here, all of the circular kind of orangish shades are what we call anchor communities. And so what is that? In the center, there's a mix of uses. There's probably a little bit of commercial. There's some, in some cases, institutions. So there are many churches that are working in communities across the city. And so in some cases, it might be a church and a small store. In other cases where you see those kind of darker centers that are darker blues, darker purples, those are more like medical institutions that gather people, neighborhoods around. And so when you think about an anchor community, it's really a multitude of uses where people can go to obtain the services that they need. There are significant activity centers. They can be citywide, so attracting a lot of people to a drive center, or they can be community supporting and community serving. They're generally walkable. If they aren't walkable today, what we want to do over time is make improvements, infrastructure investments to encourage walkability in those areas. And then they really consider transit. And so what we're trying to do is decrease some of the auto dependence that you see across the city, improve the viability of transit, increase the ridership. And so as we think about these anchor investments, these ways that the city can support communities, also looking at transit opportunities around those areas. And so the plan is huge. It's 400 pages of what we think is really great stuff, but when you really drill down into the housing focus of it, you can really look at one goal in particular, which is goal 7, but many other goals point to it. And so what that is promoting affordable and prosperous communities. One of the things that we heard really early on was we want the city, we the community want to see the city improved and changed, but want to make sure that it's improvement for residents who are already existing, for people who live here currently, and we can create those pathways and opportunities for those individuals. And so these are just a handful of objectives from that I thought could convey what we are discussing here today. So one of the objectives is to promote and protect housing affordability. And so what are some ways we can do that? Funding and implementing the Housing Trust Fund, supporting and advocating for the Good Landlord Program. And so as Director Young has talked about and many others, we've got a lack of quality rental housing. We've got affordable housing, but we've got a lack of that quality rental housing. And so supporting programs that hold landlords accountable for the conditions that individuals are living in, but also that celebrate the landlords who are doing the things that they ought to be doing. And then investing in repair and weatherization programs. We found overwhelmingly that a lot of the housing challenges are really around building condition issues that relate to weatherization. So it could be a bad roof, it could be windows, and there really aren't a lot of resources to address those issues in our city. And so as the city can identify ways to invest in those programs, we can promote and protect the affordability of housing in our city. The other is to increase support and resources for community-based developers and businesses. And so there's a lot of work to be done. There are some really good groups, CDCs and other small developers who are doing that work at a neighborhood scale. We think there's room for more. There's room to support even better those existing CDCs and groups. There's also room to cultivate a lot of the small developers who may not have access to capital and resources that can actually come in and change and support communities. And so we want to look for ways that we can identify training opportunities for those individuals, and then capacity building opportunities for CDCs. One of the ways to do that, especially when you're talking about a small developer and you have a housing product that they're trying to either renovate, rehab, or do a new, is to decrease their risk. So take away some of the financial risk so that they do have a little bit more flexibility in what they're trying to accomplish. So we can do that a multitude of ways. We can do that through infrastructure investments to take care of that. We can do that through catalytic improvements. We can do that through partnerships and different types of funding resources. And so being sure and being intentional about those types of things in communities where we're trying to see growth and investment encouraged. And then I think the last one is to ensure benefits of growth are extended to all communities. And this one is really difficult. I think it does take intentionality as well. But really to say, we can't be everywhere at the same time. We can't fund and invest in all places at all times. But what can we do? What can the city do? What can the city do through partnerships with other governmental agencies and other nonprofits, et cetera, to really ensure that growth is equitable, ensure that others see the benefits of that growth? And it can be done a couple of different ways. One is to extend or target incentives or different financial tools to community anchors. So that's one way that the city can say, we want to make sure that this neighborhood, this region, this area sees the benefit of this growth. Another ways are to pilot different types of programs. And so we hear a lot about community benefits agreements, which are somewhat formal. We can do that in more, we can go the formal route, or we can do that in more informal ways. And so making sure residents have an authentic place at the table as development opportunities are coming through. I think a really good example, and you've heard about Tillman Cove a couple of times already, but that is a really good example where community members will have the opportunity to shape what's the affordability, or what should the affordability be for the development project. What should it look like? How can we program it to positively affect the community and also the people who live here? So ways like that communities can participate authentically in the development process. There are other ways where we're seeing these examples in Uptown and also in Hampton, where there are community tables established to oversee the deployment of TIF funds, and so what types of development projects should happen and activities should happen in the area. And then I think there are other ways where maybe a little bit less formal than that the city and partners can encourage those types of conversations and collaborations to ensure that community groups are seeing the benefits of it, whatever the different types of development activity that's happening in their community, they can prosper from, and it's not something to push them out of the community. And so those are just a handful of the types of policy recommendations that are in the comprehensive plan. There are a host of others that really support housing affordability, that really support a multitude of housing types to meet those affordability needs, and that support actions to prevent people from having to leave their home. We have enough houses and enough vacant housing stock where folks should be able to live where they already are, and so we want to continue to support people in those areas, but improve the affordability and quality there. That might be the last slide. So I think we were going to just open it up. So that's the framing. I think we're just going to open up and have a little bit of a discussion about some of those outcomes and some of what we're trying to do.
So Ashley, I would love it, and I know Mayor Strickland already started to talk about this a little bit, but can you tell us about how the city is starting to implement some of the policies in the comp plan, especially related to the anchor strategy and affordable housing?
Yeah, so we've been, the plan, we call the plan complete around the early parts of this year, and since then, we've been trying to move fast and show progress in implementation on these huge documents. The comprehensive plan is a 20-year document, but we don't want to wait 20 years to see any outcomes from that. A couple of things that we have done already that are called for in the plan. One is the Housing Trust Fund, which several folks have mentioned. And really what that is focused on, that's the first time the city has a dedicated fund to support housing, affordable housing in our Memphis community. And so that's available to the entire city. And we're pushing to get that targeted to anchor communities. So it's not just 3 neighborhoods, it's not just the north, it's not just the south. It's available for the entire city. And what that fund is really focused on is, I talked earlier about repair and rehab programs. So we've got a huge backlog of people in need of significant repairs and don't have the funds to actually do so. And so that fund is focused on those types of projects. And then renovating vacant structures, already vacant structures that are available there. In future, that's the first year. In future, there are opportunities, or there will be opportunities for new construction, single-family new construction, multi-family new construction, multi-family rehab. But really starting this year, we're trying to focus on the immediate needs of that home repair for existing folks who are living in homes, and then the renovation. And then there are a couple of other things that the city is doing coming out of this as relates to supporting neighborhoods, supporting housing around. The city, once again, for the first time, has a dedicated fund to actually support the implementation of a plan, which is very exciting to me as a planner. So we have the Community Catalyst Fund, and what that is where the city can put dollars first to encourage and spur other types of investment. In some cases, that can be to try to stabilize the area around. In other cases, it might be to try to encourage that private investment to happen. And so in 2 communities, Raleigh and Whitehaven, we've begun to deploy some Community Catalyst Fund. Since it's our first year and we're just coming out of the plan process, we're starting with safety improvements. So we've had conversations with community members around what are some issues that they are seeing specifically in their anchor communities. A lot of it was really around crossing the street without, getting run over. And in these 2 communities, not unlike several others, huge 6-7 lane streets, and so people will try to catch the bus and they have to dart across the street, or young people are maybe trying to get to a library, or will eventually be trying to get to a library that's now on a different side of the street. And so we work with those communities to identify where some new transit facilities can happen, where we can add crosswalks for safety. And then one other thing that we heard is that communities in Memphis are all different. Neighborhoods have their own unique voice and their unique presence, and so we've been able to work with community groups, starting with those 2 areas, to identify what we call placemaking, and what the term I heard from Center for Transforming Communities, placekeeping, which I really like, to say what are some ways that we can show the authenticity of this neighborhood. And so we work with them to design or to think about some public art installations, some different types of banners, some things that are low-hanging and may not seem as important to the outside person, but I think to community members are really good to show the investment in their neighborhood. And then one other thing is we've been working with different types of financial tools to say how can these different tools be targeted to anchors. And so in some places, they might be working with the community group on a grant application, a grant opportunity for a specific project. In other cases, it may be targeting a specific financial tool like a TIF, a tax increment financing district, to be targeted to a certain anchor to encourage future development and investment in the area. I think that's all I got.
That's a lot for just a few months.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you too, Allison, because you have a bit of a national lens. How are other cities maximizing the growth of their downtowns or maybe their core to ensure that it does benefit other neighborhoods in their cities?
Yeah, well, I think what's exciting about the comp plan is that it does incorporate a lot of those national best practices. But also, I think part of what's really important to understand, as I'm sure many of you in the room do, having read books like The Color of Law and others, the trends that Memphis is experiencing are they have their unique challenges, but they also reflect some of the national trends in terms of older legacy cities, older industrial cities, attracting a lot of growth in their downtowns and other center city neighborhoods around universities. At the same time as some of the older neighborhoods, particularly historic African American middle class neighborhoods, have been continuing to hollow out. And that is because the practices of the foreclosure crisis and subprime lending really hit those neighborhoods hard. And in response, homeowners have started to move out into newer neighborhoods where they see an opportunity for home value appreciation, access to better schools and jobs. And so, kind of recognizing those trends, I think it requires a multi-pronged approach. First of all, to stabilizing those older neighborhoods, because there are still people who live there. They're still a really important part of the community fabric. And so that involves really thinking about how to assist the homeowners and the renters who are still there, investing in the older neighborhood stock, providing people with small amounts of money that they can use to fix up their homes and make sure they continue to be livable. Thinking about where are the places where it makes sense to turn an older, to turn abandoned or vacant housing stock back into green space, and where are the places where there's an opportunity to redevelop with a higher intensity use or a new use, and that might be, say, closer to job centers. And thinking about new loan products or new assessment practices that can make it possible for people to buy those houses that are now really low value and that traditional bank products aren't so great at serving. And then at the same time, thinking about how to redesign the bus transit network so that you can connect people who are now further from jobs to employment. And I know that the comp plan does include a really robust transit vision. Thinking about how to connect workers and their workforce training programs directly to jobs. So how can you connect industry partners with workforce providers and help address the income side of the equation? And then finally, in some of the cities that are starting to see, even a more robust downtown growth, for example, in Philadelphia, the conversation is starting to shift from how do we, continue to do the tax abatements and use the other tools that have helped foster that new growth to how do we make sure that we're really spreading that growth to the neighborhoods. And so the conversation is starting to be around how can we put inclusionary housing requirements or community benefit requirements in place so that in exchange for receiving a tax abatement or in exchange for receiving density bonuses, developers need to provide some affordable housing or maybe pay higher wages or use union labor. So that's a fine balance, right, between the risk of shutting down development in the downtown or center city neighborhood, but it's really important to continue to have the eye on that long game so that as the market does strengthen, you're making sure to take advantage of it for everybody. So I think we wanted to also talk a little bit, if we're okay on time, about metrics for success. And Ashley, could you start by talking about how the city is going to be measuring the success of the comp plan?
Yeah, so we've, so measuring a 20-year plan is, it's not difficult, but it's long. So we can't necessarily look and say, okay, in November, we're in November, November, and let's look back at the indicators where we started with and see how we moved. We've got a pretty good idea that if we check the data tonight, you know, it hasn't moved much if it's even available already. But we have started to think about what are some ways that we want to measure progress and success. How do we determine, thinking about the maps that Allison showed earlier and the indicators that Paul Young talks about, how do we determine that we're moving the needle on some of those things? And so what we went back to were the values that the community identified as part of this process. So things that they said they wanted to see improved are really central to our metrics and measures to say, is this anchor strategy working? I think the other piece to remember is that we tested and tried sprawl, which is kind of what we saw on that map for decades. And so, I would hope that we can give a targeted strategy a little bit of time to try to catch up and see if it's actually working. A lot of the values that we heard from community and ways that we want to measure progress on the plan are really to think about, are we meeting the need as it relates to transit frequency? And so, do residents have access not just to transit, but to frequent transit, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, which isn't really as frequent, but it's much better than what we are currently operating in. And so as we look over time, over the next 3 years, over the next 5 years, have more residents been able to access transit in a quicker way. As we conduct and support different development projects and proposals, are they considering that transit and making sure that they are doing things on a high frequency transit route? If you remember the anchor map that I showed, a lot of those big orange bubbles are along places where we are projected to see 15-minute routes, 30-minute routes. And so matching the development in those areas. Some other things that community members said are stable housing values. And so if we monitor, I think our last housing value map was 2010 to 15. If we start to look at 2012 to 2020, and then the next time period after that, do we start to see some of those places that are red transition into that bluish color? So some of the places that had a significant decrease in housing value, do we start to see some of those move to stability? I think more importantly, do we start to see, or do we ensure that the places that already seem to remain stable, are they staying that way? So we don't want to see the continued loss. As we monitor and check progress and see how we're doing on these indicators, we can pivot our strategy, we can pivot our housing strategy to ensure that we continue to see opportunity. Some other ways is proximity and access to employment and jobs. And so, as I said, the plan is huge and couldn't go through everything today, but there are several maps that show a lot of places where people are either living below poverty or making less than the median income, are not very connected to job access, to major employment centers. And so what we want to do is to see that distance shrink. And so that could be by encouraging and supporting different types of development of employment centers close to residents, or to just improving the access from where people live to where people actually work. And then some other outcomes that we want to think about are income. So our incomes remaining stable. We think that we can't solve the housing challenge in a vacuum. And so to the extent that we can look at these other issues to say people aren't able to obtain affordable housing due to their level of income, where can we start to see those incomes rise to match what we need from an affordability standpoint. The last couple of things are some things that we can monitor on an annual basis, and so we really think the targeted approach by the city using its capital improvement dollars, its catalyst funds to invest first in an area can encourage the development community, whether it is nonprofit CDCs or for-profit developers, to act in an area. We can really start to look at and monitor the number of building permits that are pulled, and we actually did this for the comprehensive plan as well, to see where building permits were being pulled from. So we can look at that and see, are more building permits and more development activity actually happening in our targeted anchors and our targeted approach. And then I think it's really important, numbers are great, but we need to talk to people. And so I think it's really important to maintain that dialogue with our CDC partners and other folks who are working on the ground to say, we think we're doing this really great stuff and we think we're working alongside of you, but is our approach really working? Are we supporting not only the big picture of the comprehensive plan, but the vision that you've got for your community, are we doing it in a way that's equitable, that's inclusive? And I think by looking at those different things, we can monitor our progress along the way. And then as we realize where we're maybe getting off track or not really, maybe we're meeting the goals, but we're falling short of something, we can start to pivot and modify our approach by keeping that dialogue and conversation open. And then I think I wanted to turn the question to you as well, and just ask from your perspective, are there some metrics that we should be looking at or some ways that we should be really thinking about measuring and evaluation as we come out of this process?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on so many. The only things I would add are really thinking about the number of residents or households served, both on the housing side, on the economic development and workforce development side. How many people are you reaching, and is that increasing over time? Is the geography changing over time? And then also, one of the things we did with you all during the planning process was look at building permits. So not just thinking about where new development is happening, but also where reinvestment in the communities is happening. And the city does have the data to do that, to look at where people are pulling building permits to reinvest in existing structures. And I think that's a really interesting metric as well. So are there questions from the audience?
You want to stand?
Good morning, I'm Lydia Smith, Director of Public Relations with NAREV Memphis. I feel a little overwhelmed at this moment. And you mentioned there were a lot of areas within the city of Memphis that you all have invested in with the Capitalist Program and several other programs. Do you have any before and after pictures of the areas that you invested in so we will have a visual to see what actually transpired? Because I'm not familiar with all the areas that you talked about, but I would really love to see the actual progress that you all have achieved.
Yeah, that's a great, is everybody hearing me on this? I can't go on. So that's a really great question, and the short answer is we don't have the pictures yet. We've started, so with the Catalyst Fund, we've invested in 3 anchor communities. The area around Tillman Cove, which is in New Hampton, the area around the Raleigh Town Center, which when I say invested, the contract and notice to proceed was just executed yesterday, so we're not gonna see anything just yet. And then in Whitehaven around Elvis Presley and Rains area. So the extent that we make progress is that funds have been deployed and certain projects have started. We don't have those pictures, but that's a really great point to make, to say how can we start to, when we're thinking about evaluation and metrics and measurements, how can we capture physically the environment before and the environment after the investment? And I think we can do the same thing. The Housing Trust Fund funds are available. I'm not sure exactly when that closes, but I know within that there's also some requirements for pictures and imagery to show progress along the way, to show that you've actually rehabilitated a house, you've actually renovated a vacant structure. And so, yeah, I think hopefully the next time when we have this conversation next year, we can show those before and afters to say, here's where we're starting. I think today we're saying, here's where we're starting to implement and how we're starting to do those things. And then hopefully next year there are more stories behind that, and then actual visuals to show what that looked like, and maybe even some conversations and interviews with community members who have helped us make those decisions. That's a really great question. Thank you so much. Other questions?
Okay.
Hi, my name is Janice Mundy. I've met a few of you. I hear what you're saying. It all sounds nice and good, but I live in a community where none of what you're saying is actually happening and is not having been considered. I have spoken with you, Mr. Burgess, when you was the county commissioner for District 7. I brought this to your attention actually passed back in, I think, May of 2017. I live in the community, North Memphis, not Frazier, but North Memphis, the Hollywood High Park unit. during the same time that you guys are supposed to be doing your fact finding to support Memphis 3.0, the city of Memphis, at the will of Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, was taking homes from poor people, senior people in the Hollywood community, all because they wanted to do an expansion. They wanted to redevelop this downtown area where Memphis Light, Gas, and Water has about 11 acres. And then they decided to come over to our poor black community that has been neglected for over 40 years. We had had no kind of federal block grant money, no developments. So they came over and started forcing people out of their homes against their will. And so I brought that to your attention. I brought that to Melvin Bird's attention. I have tried to have meetings with Jim Strickland. He has refused to meet and talk to me. So when you talk about affordability, well, okay, affordability, to my understanding, supports middle class people. Okay, but when you talk about housing needs for low income people, why are you taking over 200 residential lots in North Memphis, zoned residential, and turning it into an industrial park for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water? You talk about how Memphis is 325 square miles wide. Surely there's other property within the city of Memphis, including Shelby County, that Memphis Light, Gas, and Water could move from downtown to another neighborhood without encroaching and destroying our neighborhood. They want to bring their entire trucking fleet from that north complex down Hollywood Street. Hollywood Street is a major thoroughfare through the city. It impacts 3 elementary schools. So you industrialize poor black communities, infecting elementary children for a need of convenience. So when you sit here and you speak about the things that you say you're planning on doing, none of that is applying and happening to the community of Hollywood High Park. And no matter how many people in power I try to bring this to their attention, including you, Ms. Young, I had a meeting with you, nobody seems to care. So I sit here and I listen to this and I become frustrated because, again, I know for a fact what you're saying is not happening here. You continue to talk about the same neighborhoods, downtown, Whitehaven, Hampton, all these areas that benefit not just poor people, but really affluent. The Elvis Presley area, that benefits the tourists and things of that nature. Binghamton, that's been supported by a white development corporation that they build and get their salaries from, while the community do get some benefits from it. But again, when it comes to the neighborhood that's most vulnerable, that has not had any investments, like Mayor Strickland said, they're doing all this redevelopment out here in Hickory Hill. Hickory Hill just became, like he said, a part of the city in 1981. Well, the Hyde Park is one of the oldest black communities to Orange Mound in Douglas, and we're not getting anything. Our neighborhood has been destroyed for convenience for an industrial park, and that's not right.
All right, so I jumped up just to respond to that. I didn't mean to interrupt the session, but I did want to respond. Thank you for the comments, Ms. Monday. As you know, you and I have had numerous conversations. I drove you around in my car to go look at the site and look at the issues. Presented a number of recommendations on how to address the situation as it stands today. The site has been acquired. MLGW owns it. It's under their purview, under their capital plan. They're making the improvements to the property. My goal and our goal today is to figure out how do we address the situation as it stands today. And I'm committed to working with you to help move that forward. So, with that said, I think we're at the end of this session. So I want to keep us in a timely manner. Ms. Monday, we can talk a little bit more on the side. Thank you all.